So this summer, we've been telling true stories, reclaiming the sacred art of testimony. And so today I was so grateful to hear Stan's story and testimony of his faith, particularly the piece about prayer. And as I was thinking about prayer this week in preparation for today, I was longing to be able to spend this time just hearing from you all about your own testimony about prayer. Wouldn't that be great? You not hear me preach and we can just talk to each other about our prayer lives? Well, maybe we should do, no, I'm just kidding. Did someone teach you to pray? Do you remember when that happened? When you think about prayer, what comes to your mind? Do you think about putting your hands together and bowing your head and saying words out loud? Is that the image that comes to mind? Or is there something else? Some of the questions I hear from you when we talk about prayer is, well, who is it? Is there a who that we're praying to on the other side? Does prayer really make a difference? I mean, it's fine to pray, but really there's things to do in the world. And then some of you tell me, I can't make it through the day without prayer. A theologian that I like, Tony Windross, who I'm fond of, says that the way we think about prayer has a lot to do with the way we think about God. If we're theists, so if we imagine God as an entity somehow in some way apart from us and the world, then we tend to think about prayer as a conversation with that being. If we are non-theists, if we think about God more as energy or flow or the power of love or the Spirit, then we can think about prayer more as what puts us in touch with that energy or flow. For me, to be honest, I kind of fall in both camps. Most of the time, I am probably, you would call me a non-theist. I tend to think about or imagine God as an activity rather than an entity. So like the divine lure that lures us towards love, compassion, creativity, justice, wholeness. Like the Apostle Paul says, that in whom we live and move and have our being, Spirit. That tends to be kind of where I think about God. But to be honest, I have my theist moments. Those moments where I'm like, help me. Where are you? Thank you. Those moments when my soul just cries out to someone, and in those moments I am imagining that there is a being that hears me. Those moments when my soul, my heart is broken open, I am lying literally prostrate on my floor of my room, saying, I don't know how to get from where I am to where I need to be. And in those moments, I need to believe that there is someone on the other side of that prayer that hears me. So we're talking about testimony, so here's a really important piece of mine. And for those of you, probably not super surprising, those of you who know me, what I believe is that we're created to be in relationship with God, with the world, with ourselves, and that the spiritual path is about doing the things that restore us to that relationship. And prayer is an important part of that. What is also true of me, however, is that the times when I most need to be restored to whatever it is beyond ourselves to help me get back to my true and essential self, the times when I most need that, I can forget. I can be like that Pharisee in the parable that runs up the temple steps, so full of themselves, checking off the boxes, that there's no need for anything else. You know, in the Pharisee, I think for those of us who are familiar with the Gospels, we can hear Pharisee or we can read that and we can think, enemy of Jesus. But really the Pharisee is not a bad guy. The Pharisee, a little arrogant, probably. Thank you, God, that I'm not like this poor sinner. A little arrogant. But really, the Pharisee is righteous. The Pharisee prays. The Pharisee is going to the temple as an Orthodox Jew. The Pharisee tithes. The Pharisee is like me and like most of you. Pharisee is the person that I want to have in the congregation, person who pays their pledge, person who goes to committee meetings, person who shows up for worship, person who is faithfully trying to live out the way to be a religious person in the world. I mean, the Pharisees were the people, despite the bad rap they get in the Gospels, they were the people who were trying to maintain the faith in the face of the Roman occupation. The fact that they did that in a way that sometimes forgot the spirit of the law is true. But they were the righteous, good people. The tax collector, on the other hand, was the person who was benefiting from the Roman occupation to the detriment of the people around. So the original hearers of this parable would have been shocked to hear the last line of the parable that I erroneously forgot to have Deidre read. The last line of the parable says, Two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee, one a tax collector. Pharisee says, "Thank you, God, that I'm not like this tax collector. Look at all the ways I'm righteous." The tax collector says, "Have mercy on me, a sinner." The end of that parable says, that man, the tax collector, went to their home justified, and the other one did not. So for the original hearers of this parable, they would have been shocked that even though the Pharisee was a little arrogant, shocked that it was the tax collector who went home justified. I think this entire passage for me hinges on what is meant by that term justified. There's a couple ways to understand it. The first one is we can understand it as vindicated. It can get translated as vindicated, like right in the eyes of God. And maybe that's what Jesus meant. But another way to understand that word, justified, is restored to relationship. Restored to relationship. If you think about what happened, the Pharisee left the temple exactly the way he came in, righteous, good, in his own self. The tax collector left justified, restored to relationship with God, relationship to himself, relationship to his community. I think there are times when it's hard for me to remember that I'm not sufficient unto myself. And it's those times where I most need to remember that. Pharisee wasn't a bad guy. He just forgot that he needed God. To come up to the temple to pray, to lay yourself down, literally or metaphorically, and say, I need something beyond myself, takes a huge amount of courage and humility. What I thought was the most prophetic and courageous and inspiring thing about Stan's testimony, and I say this not to embarrass Stan, but because it really spoke to me all week long, was I don't know if you remember at the beginning, Stan said, I'm not even sure about this concept of a being, a God who wants to be in personal relationship with me. And then towards the end, he talked about this daily disciplined prayer practice where he's putting his heart out in relationship, even though he's not sure if he can really get on board with that concept that there's something, someone on the other side in which to be in relationship with. But in humility, he puts himself daily out in the possibility that he doesn't actually even really need to know what that is. There's a huge amount of humility in that. I really believe that we are not sufficient unto ourselves, not because we're bad, but because we're human and we're finite. That we need each other, we need God, however it is we understand God, and we need to be restored to that essential part of ourselves. And I also believe that there's no other way to do that other than spiritual practice, which oftentimes I call prayer. Now, there's as many ways to pray as there are people in this room, and probably more. And a phrase I really love is pray as you can rather than as you can't. So for some of us, daily prayer and meditation, loving kindness, sitting in silence really works. If you think about that and you're like, I can't even have 5 minutes to take a shower because you're a parent of a newborn, or if that idea of sitting in silence doesn't work for you at all, then let go of it. If the idea of relationship with God or with whatever doesn't work for you, let go of it. Think about what it is that will restore your spirit to what makes you your most essential self. What is it that restores you to being joyous, happy, and free, more compassionate, more justice-seeking, more loving, more peaceful? Is it singing collectively with others? Understanding your voice in connection with the whole? Is it playing soccer once a week? Or dancing the two-step? Moving your body in a way that gets you out of your mind? Is it being in the redwoods and looking at that little sprout growing up to that tree and saying thanks? Is it writing? What is it that restores your spirit? Here's what I believe. There is a God who longs to be in connection with us, to restore us to God, to each other, to ourselves. And our job is to put ourselves in alignment. That's another way we can understand justified, in alignment with that flow. I'm going to invite Liz up to play a little bit of music. And I invite you all into a time of prayer. If you have a practice that restores you and sustains you, thanks be to God for that. And I invite you to reflect on it and recommit to it in some way. If you have a practice and you're not sure if it's actually restoring you, I invite you to ask for what something new might be. If you are like, I don't even know what that could possibly mean, that's okay too. I invite you into this time to ask for what you need.